So, officially hello to everybody. Yeah, we're half an hour late. So we'll see whether we'll need to stay a little later today, because I don't want you to miss everything that you need to receive today. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. And I want to say hello to our online participants, to Reinhild and Bettina and Tali, and who else has stayed at home today?
Who's on it?
Yeah.
So we have Reinhild, Bettina, and Christine.
And Christine. Okay, right. Wonderful. So I don't know if you had the chance to look at the schedule. It's pretty intense. I was very ambitious when I planned it, and I hope to make it right, that it actually happens as I plan. We'll see. So we are going to meet today and tomorrow, and then we're going to meet again in September and in October for the full training. This weekend is more of an introduction into the expansion method and its dynamics and its foundation and basic psychological philosophy. And you will see that with every weekend it will go deeper. So think of it as a building that we're building one floor over the other, okay? I'm going to be available for questions also during the time between the weekends. So probably I would encourage you to use the methods that we are going to learn in this weekend on yourself again with other people. So any questions that you're going to have during this time, you can always write to me or to Carlos. You can always write in German. Don't feel that you need to write in English. We will work it out. And there's also going to be a webinar before the third weekend. We will announce the date, and that webinar will be our opportunity to meet again as a group online, to ask questions, to share your experience, and just to go deeper. Because for me, this is like a training. It's not just a seminar. I really want those who intend to work with other people to feel really capable of using the methods. When I learned it many years ago, it's like over 10 years ago, I learned it in Israel. I was thrown into the water by my teacher, by Shai, who developed it. I just went through a training, and then he asked me to open a clinic and then go do it. And I was like, okay. And it was a pretty amazing process, because 3 months later I was fully booked, and it flourished. So I believe, but I don't believe in throwing people into the water if I can really teach them how to swim well. So please regard me as your friend and as your guide, and don't be hesitant to ask anything through this training, and also after, when we do the supervision time, I'm going to be available for that. I want to I'm going to talk about the certification process in the next weekend. This is not so important today, but I just want to share very briefly the birth of the expansion method in the world. So its developer, most of you, I guess, at least heard of him, and most of you know him. His name is Shai Tubali, and he's a spiritual teacher. He's been a spiritual teacher for the last 21 years. And while he was still teaching in Israel, he came to the conclusion that although through his presence and his teachings, people were having very deep experiences of opening of consciousness, for some reason, for most of them, it didn't last. So they would have this opening, but then something would just fall back into the old patterns, into the old negative relationship with oneself, and instead of really inspiring people to develop, it created some kind of disharmony, some kind of conflict, because the more you enter the light and then you go back to the crush to the ground, and the more it makes you wonder what's going on. So it came to Shai came to the conclusion that some bridge is needed. What was for him very natural, because he just went through a very spontaneous awakening, which just became an irreversible state, which freed him from many things, from many psychological patterns. It just happened to him. And then when he was inexperienced, he thought it could happen just to anybody else. But then his experience showed him that it doesn't work that way. For most of us, we need something much more gradual. So we started to play with the idea of techniques. He didn't like techniques very much. He's like in his heart, he's a disciple of Jiddu Krishnamurti. I don't know if you guys know about him, but he was an Indian spiritual teacher from the last century, and he always spoke about no method, no path, no organization. And so that's how Shai felt about things. But then his experience showed him that we need some tools, some ways to build our structure so the light can stay and doesn't fall down. So fortunately for us, he came up with the expansion method. And I don't know, I always felt as a instructor, whenever I used to give in the beginning these sessions to people, I'm like, how did he do it? Where did it come from? It always has some kind of mysteriousness to it, and I guess it will always stay that way. But luckily, this bridge was built, and through this method, a lot of people managed not just to enter very deep states of meditation, but also gradually work on their psychological layer and to heal it and to bring it into alignment with what they discovered in meditation. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be our own experience, and this is partly what we're going to give to other people when we give it. And just that you know, this method is a very extensive one. Shai has developed over 50 techniques. I was the lucky one to study all of them. But I guess after 10 years of working myself full-time, I had full-time clinic in Israel. Now I have a full-time clinic in Berlin since 7 years that I'm here. It's not?
Oh.
Yeah, okay. I can say that my experience has shown me that the most needed process I see people in my clinic need is basically trauma healing. And we will enter the question of trauma and what is trauma and all that next weekend. But this is why I chose, when I constructed the training with Shai, to really concentrate on that level of healing, because I feel that it includes many of the other techniques in some way or another. So the fact that you're not going to study 50 techniques doesn't mean you're missing out on anything. You're going to get the most essential knowledge of this method. And just to let you know, what we're studying in this training is what I call level 1. There is level 2, and level 2 is going to be all about the unconscious memories, what we call in the expansion method the hidden memories of trauma, which are not as accessible as the ones that we remember. And probably maybe some of you have noticed on yourself or on people that you work with, if you work with people, that sometimes people have those patterns or these fears or whatever inner beliefs that they can't really point to something specific, and they don't know why they feel that way, they don't know why they think that way, they don't know why they behave or react in a certain way, but there they have it. And one of the greatest gifts of the expansion is the ability to access the subconscious and to trace the root cause of all those things and bring it to the light and heal it. So this is level 2, just so you know. We are, if you're going to be really into it, there's always ways to go forward. So I think we're going to start with our teaching. So our first talk, I will brief you a little bit on the foundations of the expansion method and its esoteric and energetic background. So one of the first rules of the expansion method is a very simple one, and it's the rule that expansion is bliss and contraction is suffering. And I guess this is just a very simple description of reality. I mean, you can all, I'm sure, identify with that. Whenever we contract, and we contract like so many times a day for so many reasons, and some of our contractions are just small, like, oh, I missed the bus, or oh, it's so hot, or whatever, and it can also be much more dramatic, like something much more dramatic can happen and contract us for some reason. And if you really follow that dynamic of contraction, immediately we feel bad. There is something about contracting that makes us feel trapped or limited or caught up in something that sometimes it's hard to get out from. And the expansion, which is what we're talking about here, is actually the complete opposite. When we expand, we feel bliss. And the reason we feel bliss, and we can go on, is because everything in the universe wishes to expand. So when Shai came up with this method, he actually realized that expansion is a very natural movement in the universe. So everything in the universe expands. I think that was one of the realization Einstein had, despite his wish to find out something else, when he looked through the Hubble telescope and he actually realized that the universe is moving apart, it's moving away. And this very natural dynamic within the universe is actually the dynamic of our consciousness. So this is why the expansion method is not just a psychological method, it's also founded on very basic rules of enlightenment, of spirituality. And we will discuss this very nice interplay between psychology and spirituality throughout our trainings. But this is one example. And we will all experience it here many times, that expansion is bliss, that to have our consciousness expanded and our body open up and our entire system just relax into that expansion is always a great experience. And that actually we always long to be in that state. For some reason, we were brought up with this instinct to do the other way, right? We somehow believe we need to be on guard. We need to put our walls up. We need to all the time feel our way through life and see whether this is a good space to expand or not. Is this a safe space that I can drop my guard or not? But actually we don't want to do that. We actually all the time would wish to have that capacity to always be in bliss. And I can tell you personally, because I've been a very contracted person in my past. And through the expansion, through my years of training and personal process, I came to the conclusion that we actually can walk around this reality with all its problems and dangers and what have you, and keep expanded to a certain degree. So there is something about this method that can really teach us to never contract again. Just maybe small contractions, like, you know, like a little wind on the surface of the ocean that creates little waves. I mean, we are humans, it's okay. I'm not talking about being perfect. I'm definitely not. But I am talking about a certain capacity to stay really open and really expanded all the time, no matter what happens. And I really hope that I could not just make you believe me, but actually experience that through our process together. So remember this: expansion is bliss, contraction is not, okay? And every time you feel contracted, you can always remember this simple rule and say, hey, the universe doesn't contract, the universe expands, so I can tune myself, okay? So another important guideline of the expansion is that basically there is no darkness. Sometimes we feel there is darkness, there is light, there is positive, there is negative, there is some really awful things that hide in our subconscious, monsters. What I really, really like about this method is that there is no darkness. As a basic truth, there is no darkness. Everything that we experience or believe to be dark is basically light waiting to be revealed. Because you will see later when we discuss the other levels of expansion, there are states of consciousness through which we come to the conclusion, when we look at reality, that reality is made of light. Everything is made of light. So even the things we consider otherwise, that we tag as darkness and we tend to be ashamed of, or we try to hide it, or we try to suppress it, is actually not. And this is an important thing to understand, because then everything that we have inside us, all the content of our psyche, the things that we consider the bad, the shameful, the things that we need to really look away from, are actually our greatest potential, because there is so much energy there just waiting to be revealed. And what I really like about this method is that it allows us to feel really comfortable to let this so-called darkness surface to our consciousness and undo it. You will see that the entire process of expansion is all about transformation. It's like taking the cheapest level of metal, like graphite or just basic steel, and through this expansion we turn it into what it really is. We expose the nature of it, which is pure gold. So when I heard that in the beginning of my trainings, I was like, really? It's all light? Oh wow. So it put in proportions all our fears and all dualistic relationship that we have with ourselves and with what we have inside of us, and it gives a certain level of release just to already know that the basic rule is there is no darkness. And it also encourages our system to let things flow up. So whatever it is we are desperately trying for years to repress, to overlook, to pretend it's not there, don't need to do that anymore. You will see that in this process, everything is welcome. Because everything is light. And everything in the universe just waits for us to become aware of it and transform it. Everything wants to merge with the light. So just let it be in your mind, just like expansion is bliss, okay, everything is light, no darkness. And just feel what it makes you feel like when you get in touch with these possibilities. It's already expanding you, right? Just a little bit. And there is another beautiful aspect to the potential of expansion, and it's that expansion is an endless process. Because it's one with the universe, and the universe has no end. I think scientists didn't find the end of the universe yet, and I don't think they will. So in the same way, in the same rule, when we expand, there is no limit to where our consciousness can stretch towards. And I remember that when I heard that in the first time, I was like, because somehow we like a process to have a beginning and a middle point and some kind of ending, so we know we got it. But in the expansion, you will see that every time you feel you reached a limit, that your consciousness cannot stretch beyond it, this is it. And it's already huge. Let me tell you, there is beyond it. And at some point, when I merged with that rule, it made me really, really happy, because it felt like, wow, it means that until the end of my days, I could be surprised and see new things, right? I mean, we can travel this physical world, we can see all the countries, we can visit all the places, and at some point there will be nothing left to see, right? We've seen it all. But when we close our eyes and we expand our consciousness, there is no end to what we can find out. So in that sense, the expansion as a method, it connects us with this endless potential of our consciousness. And maybe at some point, when you become more accustomed with the process of expansion and feel more comfortable with it, you might find out that actually who you are, in the deepest sense of the word, is also a limitless thing. Right? Because we as human beings, we are born into this mortal existence. We have a lifespan. We know that we have an expiry date. And there's nothing we can do about that. That's a fact. We can stretch it a little bit, but hey, that's it. But then we can actually access this inner feeling that who we are is actually infinite. That it somehow transcends life and death. And that gives a completely different meaning to our mortal existence. It gives us a completely different sense of power and presence while we are alive. And I'm pretty sure that at some point you will all experience that, because it's very available through this method. And now I think it's time to... do we have the prints of the subtle fields?
Yes.
So let's give it. I'm going to talk now about the energetic background. So you will understand a little more in details. What does it mean to expand, and where does it all go? Because it's also abstract, right? Okay. Where is it? So when Shai developed this method, he also developed a certain theory, which is called the theory of the subtle fields. And Carlos is going to give you a copy of that. Maybe I can have one too.
So one in English.
Yeah, good.
Ja, enkele.
So this theory is not something very new. There are many traditions and other spiritual teachers that spoke about this kind of theory. And each one has its own version of mapping the subtle fields or the subtle bodies. But for the sake of our training, for the sake of understanding expansion, we will learn it through Shai's theory. And just remember now when we go into it and just describe it a little bit. That what we are now describing is you, each and every one of us. We all have these subtle fields to some degree. So first of all, it's maybe important to talk about this word that I constantly use, the word consciousness. And in our context, when we speak about consciousness, we're talking about a certain structure of perception. This structure of perception that we have, this kind of faculty that enables us to reflect and perceive different levels of our being and of the universe. For some of us, it's very dormant, and for some of us, it's more awakened. But it doesn't matter because we can all wake it up and start to use it with much more awareness, which is something we do in the expansion. Where are we here? Okay. So the existence of the subtle fields is quite extraordinary because it means that we actually carry within us the very seed of consciousness. And we usually don't use it. I mean, how many people do you know who are just not really aware? Who are just more automatically go through the motions of life without appreciating the fact that they're aware of life, right? This is what makes us different from our brothers and sisters in the animal kingdom who are just alive but can't really fully know that they are alive. Some of them can a little, but not like us. But then, even though we have this wonderful gift, we as humans usually don't know even about it, right? Like my parents never told me, oh, you have consciousness. I will teach you how to use it. They don't know, right? They don't teach us in schools. But it's a very, it's like maybe the greatest resource or the greatest treasure we have. And in this expansion method, what we learn is how to utilize it and how to grow it. Because the more our expansion grows, life will change for us. It's a fact. That's what happened to me. So let's go briefly into this beautiful diagram. Or maybe before that I will say just another thing. Well, when you look at this map, so you see we have different fields, all the way that goes into infinity and the source, all these really big words. And for some of us, those realms are not yet available, because they are all available in potential, but to actually access it, what happens when we expand is we somehow give birth to that in actuality. And I remember the first times I expanded in my life, when Shai taught it in Israel, I remember the shock I had in my first expansions, because even though I was already meditating for quite some time before that and had, or at least believed I had some really deep experiences, when I expanded, I came to places that I never saw before. I felt feelings I never felt before. I felt myself like I never felt before, and it was shocking. And that's when I was explained that by expanding, I'm actually giving birth to these fields. It's like you enter a new country. I always imagined like people like Columbus or all those discoverers who came to a new and just landed on some new land from the sea with this big machete, and they had to carve their way into the land. This is what we do when we expand. We give birth to our subtle fields, and the more we expand, the larger they grow. And the larger they grow, the bliss grows with it. So it's important for us to understand it, because it will become very essential later when we studied the trauma technique. It will become very essential to understand, and that's why today I'm going to talk about it just in general, just so you will become aware of what is possible. So the most basic layer of our consciousness, you can see it here as well. We don't call it a field. It's that level of the brain, the physical body, which we all know, right? Everybody knows themselves as the physical body, as this flesh and bone creature. And this is a visible field. This is where we can still grasp it with our senses. We can perceive the body, we can perceive its texture. This is something we're all very familiar with. And some people are just familiar of that. Because I remember when I started my spiritual journey or my self-development journey, that's the only thing I felt. I was the body, and that's it. Didn't know there was anything beyond it. It was newsflash for me to find out there are other fields that surround me. So most of the people we are going to meet also as practitioners is people who don't have a clue that they have such a vast potential. It's always my pleasure to show them this and say, hey, this is what you can become. Yeah? It always makes people happy to see how vast their potential can be. So this level of the brain, we can even go further than that. It's more like a tool of survival. This is how our brain developed. It's a very, in a way, it's a very sophisticated machine, but in the same way, it's quite simple. It's all wired to protect us while we are alive. It's our basic survival mechanism stored there. Thank God we have it, right? Without it, our species wouldn't survive. However, if we are just bound to that level, our life experience would always be a bit limited, right? Because it will only be about security and making sure that everything is more or less okay. And that's a very limited version of ourselves. But this is our starting point. And the beautiful thing about the fields, and maybe we can proceed even, is that the fields connect the brain with let's say the hidden realms, the ones that we can't perceive with our physical senses. And that's where the bridge is starting to get created between the brain, which is more of a survival tool, and other realms which have nothing to do with survival, basically. So when the brain expands, the first field that we can meet is what we call here the electromagnetic field. And you can see that in this layer of consciousness we have the subtle anatomy, which is the chakras in the central column. And we can even see on this diagram that there is a certain level of identity connected to each layer. In this case, I am the life force. So I'm sure this is something everybody knows to some degree. Sometimes we just don't know that's what we're talking about, but everybody senses the electromagnetic field. The electromagnetic field has actually been researched and proved by science already. So all the things the sages talked about, the nadis, the meridians, the chakras, this is all proved today that it actually exists. It's not just theory. And we all know our chakra system, even if we never really meditated directly on it, because we all feel different things which are completely not physical, right? Like when we fall in love, when we have these sensations in the heart, or when we feel afraid and we have these butterflies in the stomach, all those sensations which have nothing to do with our physical organs, they derive or they stem out of this realm, this electromagnetic field. And I actually remember when I started meditation and started to feel I started to feel this energy, right? So whenever we talk about the energy has nothing to do with the brain. It has everything to do with the electromagnetic field. So everybody actually can sense energies. You know, like we say, oh, that person, I don't like his energy. What are we talking about, right? It's a subtle thing. So for us, for the expansion method, this realm, the electromagnetic field, is very important to get to know it and to experience it directly, because this is what we actually develop. The more our chakras develop, the more our energetic body develops. And our energetic, when I talk about our energetic body, I mean the electromagnetic field. The more it grows, the more it develops, the more access we have into the other layers. And it's a very happy feeling to move from I am the body, or I am the survival mechanism, to I am the life force. It's a completely different sense of being. And you will see many times when you expand by yourself or with other people, that it's pretty much the first step. That people go from the condensed material level to this level of energy. And for many people to experience themselves as energy is very, very significant. It's the first step we can take into our basic nature as freedom. Because all of a sudden this electromagnetic field, well, it still can feel limited, but it's not the same. It has different rules. So we will talk much more in depth very soon about this electromagnetic field. I will go into more details about it, but let's go to the next field, which for us is very important, the mental emotional field. So the mental emotional field is what I call the field of our subconscious, where our deepest memory connections are stored. our deepest imprints. It's where really all our suffering takes place, our belief system, what we call our patterns. And for us, when we work with the expansion and we aim to use it for a therapeutic purpose, for a healing purpose, most of the time this is the field we're going to work on. This is where the traumas are stored. This is where our negative memories, negative emotions, all the things that block us or shade our vision and don't allow us to see the world as it is, which is a absolutely magnificent place. This is where it's all stored. So this is where we need to work on. And the problem with many therapeutic tools that I have met, which are not the expansion, is that when they don't have the access to a higher state of consciousness, then they try to solve these problems on the very same level where the problems are created, which makes it not impossible, but limited. And that's what I really, really like about this method, because whatever work we do on this layer, we will not do it from that state of consciousness, because that will be impossible. It's like blind showing another blind person something. None of them see it. How can they show reality? So this is a field we're going to be a lot in touch with. This is when we expand, especially the negative emotions in this weekend. This is what we're going to tap into. They're all stored there. So to some degree, all human beings actually have these three basic layers: the physical body, the electromagnetic body, and the mental emotional body. This everybody have. Everybody. But our goal is to go beyond it. And when we work with the expansion on traumas, and we'll talk about it extensively next weekend, we go beyond it, because that's the only way we can actually solve the trauma deeply and uproot it. I don't want to spoil the fun, so I'm not going to speak about it today. We'll keep something for the next weekend. But as long as we identify with the mental emotional body, this is where we really still contract. And that's when we believe that we cannot really change. I've heard people say that to me so many times when they come. Yes, I believe I can change to a certain degree. I believe I can free myself from my patterns to a certain degree, because I look around, nobody really changes. Changes are minor. And I always tell them, well, not true. That we can really, really change. We don't know the potential of our consciousness. So that's why we believe that change can be very small. But I'm saying no. We can really deeply transform. We can become different. I mean, there are always going to be a certain structure we were born with, a certain personality type, a certain tendency, a certain uniqueness, but as far as we're talking about negativity or hidden traumas or negative imprints, this can all transform. I have dedicated 15 years of my life to do that. I have uprooted a lot of stuff. And people who know me from many years ago don't recognize me anymore, because all this darkness, all this grayness, all this stuff is gone. So it's not magic, it's not, I didn't get grace, I worked. So I'm here to tell you it's possible. Now, in between, if you look at this map again, in between the mental emotional field and the field which is beyond it, the mental spiritual field, there is a certain border. This border is called the neutral state. And the neutral state is just in between these two fields. And usually we meet it a lot in expansion. And you will see it also today and tomorrow. That at some point when we expand the negative part, the condensed level, and we can go through a few of them, at some point you will ask a person, well, give a name to the new expanded state, and he will say peace, or silence, or the light after the storm. These are the kind of words people use many times to describe the neutral state. So it's not yet completely transcended, but it's already feeling the beginning point of the mental spiritual field. And sometimes people tend, in spirituality for instance, sometimes people tend to mistake that for their consciousness, because in that state of neutrality there is no thoughts, there are no emotions, it's really calm. And it's a great place to be, of course, after you have suffered, no doubt. But we are the ones to tell there are far beyond it, better. And every time I tell to people, well, let's expand that, they say, no, I don't want to expand it, this is great. And I'm like, you don't know. Let's see what's going to be beyond it, because it's going to get better. So I mean, it's important to acknowledge the neutral state, and if a person really doesn't want to go beyond it because it's for the first time in 20 years he has silence and he has peace, that's fine. Maybe next time he would not be so attached and won't be so afraid to lose it. But we are always there to reflect there is more. Okay? So now let's go to this wonderful next step, mental spiritual field, a wonderful place to get to. And we're going to touch it even deeper today. Shai calls it the non-causal emotion state. I don't know if you ever heard that term before, and we will talk about it. But non-causal emotions means that this is a field where we, for the first time in our life, get in touch with happiness that has nothing to do with anything. No cause whatsoever. No external reason. Nothing circumstantial. It's just an eruption of joy that is part of our being. And I really remember, I have a vivid memory of the first time I met that feeling. I was practicing yoga in Israel, and we were doing some breathing techniques, and I don't know what happened, but somehow spontaneously my consciousness was expanding. I didn't know those terms then, but it just, retrospectively, that's probably what happened. And I became so happy, just like that. And I remember my eyes were full of tears. I was like, and my teacher was really concerned, like, why are you crying? What happened? I'm like, I'm so happy. I don't know why. And when I see people for the first time touch this state, I'm really happy. Because I remember what it meant for me. It told me that I could find happiness regardless. Everything. And that's why in this field you can see that the state of identity is I am free. I am free from time and space. And this is the beauty of the mental spiritual field. It's the field where we transcend the sense of time, the linear time like we know it, and the sense of space, which is the confinements of our body as we know it. This is where our consciousness starts to touch vastness, which is incredible. And this is where all our positive emotions are stored. And there is one beautiful technique in the expansion method. It's called the expansion for self-inquiry. And this is a very beautiful technique because it teaches people directly that the belief that we need something external to make us happy is not just an illusion. It blocks us completely from the truth that all that reservoir of positive emotions lies completely already in our innermost. The only thing we need to do is know how to access it, how to get in touch with it. And this is something that we feel when we touch this beautiful field. And I'm sure you will touch it over and over again. And you can see here that also Shai refers to this field as the first state of spiritual awakening, because it's really when the sense of self-identity breaks through the limitations of the physical realm, and that's when we are born in spirit. We realize that ourselves is a free consciousness. And there's a lot of bliss that comes with it, obviously. In this mental spiritual field, we also have access to very deep wisdom already. Like our ability to see reality and to understand our psyche becomes far clearer. It gives us so much clarity. So that's why in the expansion we use this field a lot to heal. So if I want to heal someone, if I want to help a person see more clearly his situation, then I have to take him there. Without this field, he could never see, he could never understand, because that's the beauty of the expansion. This is not something that I can tell people. They need to experience it directly. I'm just a facilitator of their experience, and once they're in that state, they know. They look at things and they see it for themselves. I don't need to tell them. I just know to ask the right questions for them to see it. But I don't give the answers, they do. That's why the expansion as a method is a very empowering method. But you need to work for it. So when people come to you for expansion, tell them, well, here you came to work. It's a little bit effortful, but it's really worthwhile. Let me check the time. I'm having a good time here. Okay. So let's move on to our next extraordinary field, which is the cosmic field, the cosmic soul field. And this field takes a little time to access, because for our consciousness to get in touch with it in a substantial way, it needs to develop a little bit, but it's possible. And when our consciousness touches the cosmic soul field, it has the access to a vast body of knowledge of the universe. It's where we start to become more aware of universal laws. We get to understand that life in general is a completely impersonal phenomenon, and it's all governed by cosmic rules. We are just templates of something which is far greater than us. And it's called the cosmic soul field because we also have access to what we can call the soul pattern. And I'm not going to go very deeply into this subject of soul because I don't have time. But when we enter this field, we also can get in touch with a very basic energetic structure, which we can call our soul, which is our unique pattern. It has both this unique aspect and the impersonal aspect as well, because it's part of the cosmos. And the more we get to know ourselves on that level, the more understanding of our purpose and meaning in life, like the more access we have to it. And you will see, I'm sure you know, that many people suffer from this disease of loss of meaning, especially in this very materialistic era. And people don't know why we're here, not as species and not as individuals. But when we get into this cosmic field, we start getting the glimpses into these questions. Why are we here as humans, and why are we here as individuals? And maybe I'll just tell you briefly, I just finished my master's in positive psychology. And while I did my master's, I also had to write my research. And for my research, I chose a very complex question, and it was, what is the meaning of life? Or how do we perceive the meaning of life, not my life, but general life, while we enter transcendent states? So I was talking to people who had deep awakenings, and also people who went through near-death experiences. And it was so beautiful, especially the ones who had no spiritual experience, who had this near-death experience and just entered out of the blue a very, very deep state, which I sure was this level, this cosmic soul field. And they actually saw everything. They got to understand everything about life and everything about why we're here. And all of them told me the same thing. They said, well, you know, when you come back, you don't get to remember everything. You're not allowed to carry back all this knowledge. But what you're allowed is to remember that you are here for a purpose and that you have to fulfill it. So this kind of feeling we can access when we expand. We don't need to die for it. We can just expand into it. And it fills us with a lot of energy, because that's when we really, really connect to the greater reality. We really start to tap into it. And even if it sounds a bit far-fetched for some of you right now, it's not. It just takes some practice to enter that. And even if we can't sustain it, right, we expand, but then we open our eyes, we go back to our physical reality, to our physical senses. The imprint, the memory of of those levels, it stays with us. And the more time goes by and the more practice we have with expansion, the more available it is while we are with our eyes open. Like right now, I'm talking about the fields and I'm completely one with them because I've trained a lot to do it. And maybe you could also pay attention that there is this border again between the mental spiritual field and the cosmic soul field. It's called here the white light. And maybe it's time for some disclosure that actually the original name of this method was the white light method. Some people found it a bit scary because they have this, it's kind of somehow reminds people of death or stuff like that. So at some point we felt, well, okay, we're going to change the name, but the essential energy of this method, which we call the white light, is the same. And you will see also in your experience, in other people's experience, that many times when we expand and we already enter the deep, subtle fields, we will ask them to describe the state. They will say, well, it's full of white light. And when they say it, they probably mean that realm, that fine border between the mental spiritual field and the cosmic soul field. And this is a very, very beautiful field to encounter, Because this vibration of the white light, it means that we are tapping into the very basic structure of matter. So before we condensed into forms, there was the first building block that erupted in the universe, and this particle of light. And when we enter that state, when we have the joy of feeling it, what we feel there is absolute love. So to some degree it can be connected with Christ consciousness, this state. It's just the form of pure love, but it's still, in a most subtle way, it's still material. And when we enter that state, we get to feel that we are loved all the time. That we don't need to prove our existence. You know how everybody feels that in order to be loved, we need to somehow do something for it. Even if our parents were really nice and tried to sell us this unconditional love level, still, they would look happier if we brought a better grade. And they looked happier if we were good kids. Right? So we are trained to believe that in order to be loved or to be worthy, we need to do something for it. But when we encounter this level of the white light, we learn that the truth is not like that. That just by existing, we are already completely worthy, completely loved. So you can imagine the degree of healing people can experience just through encountering this layer. I know it did wonders for me. And the last field that we can mention, the pure awareness field, there is not really much to say about it because it's already quite subtle and kind of not material. So if we are lucky to merge with this field, that's when we really become one with what Shai calls the meditation of the universe. So the universe is always in meditation. It's a very silent state. Nothing happens there. It just is. So for the sake of therapy, we really don't need that. If we never touched it, it would be fine. But for those who have this more spiritual aspiration, or the ones that have this adventurous spirit and hears about possibilities that we can touch, then I fully recommend going all the way to the pure awareness field, because when we merge with that, it's like they say in yoga, you know, when you sleep but you're aware, you're not sleeping. So it's the deepest state of nourishment and recharge and relaxation that we can get in touch with as humans. And beyond it is already realms which we cannot really touch. Our consciousness is on one hand limitless, but at the same time it is, because we are in a physical body. I don't know what happens when we lose it, don't remember, but as long as we have a body, we will always be able just to touch the very, very far edges of what they call in spirituality the source. And really, that doesn't matter so much. I mean, just entering this pure awareness field is already so fulfilling. So before I go further, I want to see whether there are any questions so far. Anything that you want to ask, anything that you find curious. So this is the time to ask me anything about the subtle fields, anything at all. Just loudly.
Yeah, so I was wondering if there's a person, for example, who experiences when you say dark, I'm going back to the beginning, dark faith as in they're in jail or in prison, even though they, you know, they didn't do anything, something like that. So how can you explain this human? Like, I'm not even at the, you know, the white light border or anything, but you see this person could get there, like every person could possibly, but how can you explain a negative experience is just there to be expanded? How would you...
Do you know someone in jail specifically?
Yeah.
So it's it's like a specific question, right?
No, but it's also a question of when someone is fleeing from war, like these are
Mhm.
things that I'm thinking of that to me stay outside. Does that make sense?
What do you mean stay outside?
Like in my perception, or can I explain that in German?
Yeah.
Also mein Zugang zu dieser gesamten Methode ist zwar sehr persönlich, aber ich kann mir vorstellen, dass wenn ich da mit Menschen sitzen würde, denen ich das gerne auch geben möchte, dass es da Menschen gibt, die für mich außerhalb des Möglichen bleiben. Also bei denen es vielleicht für mich gar nicht so möglich erscheint, diese Brücke zu finden. Extrem viele irgendwie. Und da frage ich,
Should I translate?
Yeah, you should. Otherwise.
Okay, so she has a very personal connection to the method already, but she feels that if she would need to explain it to someone, that there might be cases where it's very difficult to build that bridge.
yeah,
Okay.
that's what I mean when I say that.
Well, I have worked with all kinds of people. I have volunteered in Israel in a prison, and I worked with inmates who were locked up for many reasons, most of them very, very serious, because this was the place where they put the drug addicts who were violent people and committed violent actions. That's why they were in prison. And I came there to teach them to expand. This was a volunteering phase. And I remember the guy I worked with, very basic guy, very I am the body guy, okay? And I remember that I had this, like, how would I ever explain that to him? How, right? And then I found out it's actually pretty easy. I just told him the truth. I said, well, it doesn't matter what you think about yourself. I am here to tell you there is something else that you don't know. Now, the first question is, do you want to know? I said, of course. Everybody wants to know, you know? And then I told him, well, the truth is that you have a much vaster potential that you still don't know. And I have the perfect tool to introduce to you so you can meet your potential. Do you want to try it? I said, yes, of course. And lo and behold, this guy was one of the best expanders I ever had. Because he had nothing to lose, you know, he was there anyway. And I didn't tell him anything esoteric, anything energetic, anything spiritual, nothing whatsoever, because I didn't feel that's what he needed. I just felt he needed an access for self-forgiveness, an access to, you know, to get himself out of this vicious cycle, because he was in and out of jail for his entire life with this problem. And I just felt like he never came to the point where he could forgive himself for everything he's done. And as long as you cannot forgive yourself, you will commit that again and again. You will just not find a way out. So my personal goal was to help him forgive himself. Because once he felt he could be forgiven, it would be also possible for him to ask for forgiveness from the people he hurt, which were many. That was my personal goal. I never told him anything, but we met a few times, and all we did was to expand his negative emotions, his violent emotions, his self-criticism, his self-hate, all of that, his entire baggage. And it just did its work. I didn't have to explain. He just had this experience. And from one time to the next, he was showing me these letters he wrote to his family. He had a daughter he never saw because he was always in jail. She was 15, he never saw her, she never came to visit because he never found the words to communicate to her. He felt so ashamed. And then he started to write these letters of forgiveness to people, to family, to people he hurt. So that's why I'm saying it's not about how to say it. It's just to invite people to try. Just close your eyes. Yeah, it's like a game. Let's play a game. We have to close our eyes because the game is happening in our mind. It's not happening outside. That's it. And the more confident you are about it, they will play. Because everybody is looking for some ways to feel better. Right? And if you come like, hey, I found a way. Do you want to know? Yeah, sure. And maybe I will say something additional to that. And that's something I would like you to remember. When we sit with people, or with ourselves, it doesn't matter, because we are also people. We need to remember, we need to reflect to ourselves and to other people that there is this possibility of transformation. Like, the reason I became really successful in my work was because what people met when they met me was absolute conviction, no doubt. I was like, yeah, well, you know, maybe we can help you. Maybe you will be better. Maybe you will heal. No, absolutely. I had no doubt. I had no doubt whatsoever, not just because it helped me, but because I felt that this level of radiation is already 50% of the healing process. You know, because everybody is in doubt. Everybody wants to believe, but they find it hard. So they need to meet you to say, I got it, no doubt. And the more convinced you are of that, that's what people will experience next to you. So when I went to prison, I didn't feel, well, could he expand? Is that possible? Maybe he's not going to be able to. Maybe it will fail. I didn't allow these kind of thoughts to enter my brain. I was like, this is simple. He will do it like everybody else, and that's it. And whatever outcome will be his outcome. I think that's one hug I will never forget. When that was because I just came for like 5 times. This is the time the prison gave them in this project. And I remember the hug I got from him. I got many hugs over the years, but this one I really remember because it was fully charged with this gratitude, not to me, but to himself, to realizing that he is much vaster than he ever thought he would ever be. Does that answer you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions before we proceed? Okay. So keep that with you. We will need it later. And let me check the time. Okay. All right, so we'll just go briefly now through the subtle anatomy. This is a very vast subject, the subject of our subtle anatomy, and which is basically our chakra system. Some of you might have more knowledge already, and some of you less. And I encourage you to read. There are some books here that Chai wrote about the chakras. They are very, very interesting materials and important for us as practitioners to have access to. I wouldn't presume to teach you now because the chakras are a huge realm. There's so much to say about it. But we'll just go briefly through it because it's important to understand that that's what resides in our electromagnetic field. And a lot of our work influences the chakras. And you remember what I told you, that Chai was looking for a way to stabilize the expanded states, that people would not create this breakdown. So that's where it happens. And maybe I'll explain why now. So the chakras, you will see the way we use them in the expansion, they have also they have an energetic and a psychological aspect to that. And many times when people come to us, they will tell you a story about themselves. And most likely it will not be true. Not because they intend to lie to you, it's just because the way we present ourselves is usually distorted. Either we make ourselves look really bad or we make ourselves look a little too good. But the chakras are a very direct window to our state. In our next weekend, I will also give you the access to the chakra evaluation test that you can take on yourself and use it with your clients. But the chakras are a great gate into our more true state. They don't lie, they just reflect things as they are. So many times I don't even ask people to tell me about themselves. I don't really want to know their prejudice. It will not help me as a therapist, it will only confuse me. So I just give them this test. And their chakras tell me everything I need to know about them, or enough information to start with. That's why it's really important to know them a little bit, just to know a little bit about them. And you can see, as you can see in the, not here, the next one. Yeah. So when we speak about the chakras, we speak about 4 levels of functioning. You can see there are the imbalanced state, the functional state, the balanced state, and the awakened state. Well, most of the people who come and seek for help usually seek it for the imbalanced state or the dysfunctional state. And that's why many times because we are so complex, we can enter great states of consciousness while still be completely dysfunctional in other ways. And as long as we are dysfunctional in our chakras, we cannot sustain the energy will not hold. So when I work with people, what I aim for is to build their chakras and get them to at least a functional state. Because that's when the structure has no holes anymore. As long as it's imbalanced or dysfunctional, there's going to be the leak all the time. So we build the foundations from bottom up. And that's why also when we work with people, I will tell you a little bit more about it later. We work from the very basic chakra up. So even if a person comes to me and tells me he has a problem in his relationships, and he feels betrayed and he feels abandoned and he can't trust anybody anymore, and he wants to find his way to trust people, which indicates the heart, I would always check first for the bottom, for the first and second and third chakra, because if that is not solid, if that is not at least functional, whatever work I do on his heart chakra will not hold. So we are not going to go into much detail now about each and every chakra and how it looks like in all the levels. We'll just go through it briefly. And maybe if you want just to feel that with me, we can even close our eyes for a moment and focus on the first chakra area. So the first chakra resides in the area of the perineum, which is just between the sexual organs in the anus, and it reflects all the way down to the legs. And you can check how it feels there slightly. Because our attention, when we put it on these chakras, the chakras immediately respond and they start to vibrate. And for most of us, unless we do some deep work, the first chakra is usually imbalanced, because that's the center that gets all the traumas, all these moments of weakness, all these moments of loss of power, all the terrible experiences that we had very hard time to deal with, no matter what type, they all get stored in the first chakra. And the first chakra is the reflection of our basic relationship with life. Life as a phenomenon. And for many of us, life is dangerous. Or there is at least this imprint of life being dangerous, something that is too big to handle. Or that some catastrophe can happen every moment. It's our relationship with the forces of nature, which many times tend to be far more strong than we are. So that's why the first chakra is also the center of our basic existential fear. It's all about survival. And it can create deep attachments and gravity and the tendency towards the materialistic. It can make us accumulate money and property because it kind of makes us feel more protected. So when it's not balanced, we can also feel ourselves very fragile and fearful, and every little thing can shake us. So it also gives rise to this fantasy of a different reality. Just because this reality is just too scary. And that's why when our first chakra is not really balanced, we would not really be present here. We will live in our fantasy, in our mind. We will not inhabit the body. And I don't know if you ever had this experience that something happened and you couldn't stand, that your legs felt like jello, like something became so liquid-like in your legs because of fear. So this kind of sensations is the activation of the imbalanced first chakra. You don't feel you can stand on your legs. They don't carry you. So obviously, if we contemplate on a more optimistic state of this chakra when it gets more balanced, then of course we can start to feel more secure on our feet. There is a very famous Qigong posture. It's called standing posture. And you just stand. And it's a very powerful technique if you want to check your first chakra. Because for most people, if they're not totally balanced, after some time they couldn't stand anymore. Their feet will just not hold. So our aim when we work on our first chakra, of course, is to first bring it to a functional level. Now, if dysfunctional people in the first chakra would probably have problems staying at one place in work. They will usually get fired all the time or just quit. They find it very hard to commit to anything because of their dysfunctionality. They don't have the sense of continuity. Everything is broken. So in a functional level, we feel more at home on the planet. It doesn't feel so scary anymore. Our feet feel stronger. We might even feel we start building some roots. We can be more reliable. We can sustain ourselves. We can take care of ourselves. We are not depending. And we can think about it as like with children, right? Like when we have a child, then his first years on earth are completely dysfunctional from the point of view of the first chakra. They can't even stand. They need to learn how to do that. They can't feed themselves. They're completely depending. Unfortunately, some people grow up and stay in that level and lead a very dysfunctional life. And of course, without a solid foundation in the first chakra, there is no possibility for development. That's it. There's no possibility. And I've met some people who imagined that while their first chakra was completely dysfunctional, they imagined themselves to be spiritual. And I was the bearer of the bad news to show them that their spirituality was just a fantasy of escaping this reality. That real spirituality can only thrive on a very strong foundation. So the more balanced we become in the first chakra, the less pressure we feel, the less stress, the less fear, the more comfortable we feel on this planet. And we get this sensation that we can handle it. We can handle it. And even our very basic fear of death, which will always be there to some degree, is not so activated anymore. And in the awakened state of the first chakra, that's a very nice state to feel, because we feel that in a way nothing can happen to us. It's almost like beating death. Of course, we can't access that state without our consciousness. So there, you can see already this relationship between expansion into the subtle fields and the influence it has on our electromagnetic fields, on our chakras. The more we expand, the more we realize who we are as this spirit that is free, the more balance it creates in the first chakra. Because the message of the fields to our first chakra is there is something stronger than life and death. So it creates a very strong stability. And it can, in the more advanced state, it can really almost erase the instinctual fear we have in the body. The body can completely relax. Don't know if you ever had this complete body relaxation, maybe in a specific state, but it's usually not our normal state. So obviously you probably can understand that when we work, especially on traumas, but in general, we need to make sure that our first chakra is in a good state. Otherwise, it will be very hard to build something which is solid. And now let's look at our second chakra. We can again close our eyes and just feel it for a moment. Second chakra area. The area of the sexual organs, below the navel, our lower belly, in yoga they call it the sacral chakra. And from a psychological point of view, this area of the second chakra is very much connected to feelings of morality and guilt and shame. So these are the most dominant negative emotions in the dysfunctional state of the second chakra. So we can carry there a deep conflict between the more natural urges to express as wild life force, and then society comes and tells us we cannot, it's forbidden. So as children, one of the first shocks we get in the second chakra is when we express our creativity or our natural energies, either by touching ourselves or drawing on the wall at our parents' living room. And then in the middle of this creative outburst, we get people tell us that's wrong. We were bad children, we did something wrong. And this is imprinted as shame. And we feel guilty for expressing our life force. And this kind of dysfunctionality in the second chakra can give rise to many different symptoms, from different sexual problems to depression and to the feeling of loss of meaning. Because the second chakra is where we really get in touch with the direct energy of life, the juices of life, the flow, the creativity. And the older we get, the less innocent it becomes. The more we need to conceal it. The more we need to repress it. The more we need to apologize for it. So all these religions that tell us we are sinners just for feeling a very, very natural urge of life force, these are all imprints we have in the second chakra. And again, we can start balancing the second chakra. We go from the functional state that we can already allow ourselves to feel more naturally our inner desire and balance between what is socially accepted and what we feel inside. And the more we balance the second chakra, the more we move from the state of guilt and shame into the state of joy without a reason. So many of the people that we meet that have dysfunctional second chakra will have addictions. And many of our addictions, they develop just because we were not allowed to explore the energy or the life force in a natural way. Then we feel we need to steal it somehow and conceal it. All addictions happen in the shades. We don't see junkies sit in the cafe and just put heroin. They do it in the corner, in the dark alley. So the more we work on the second chakra, the more we balance it, the more we bring the light of consciousness into it, then the more we can let go of our addictions, of our shame, of our contraction, of our guilt. And that gives rise to a very natural sense of joy. So the second chakra is the chakra of joy. It's our ability to just feel happy in our senses, to perceive through our senses the richness of life, all the textures, all the possibilities, and to fully enjoy, to allow ourselves to fully enjoy whether we eat or we have sex or we listen to music. It's to really feel the fullest potential of joy through our senses, which was prohibited many times. And then we can move to the solar plexus, the upper belly area. Very important center. This is where we store the sense of individuality and power. And I think 99% of the people who come to my clinic suffer in the third chakra somehow. So the third chakra is the center of our capacity to become truly individual, which means to feel that we have the courage, that we have the possibility to be completely loyal with our inner belief system, with our inner values, no matter what happens. Even if everybody else says we are wrong, even if everybody shames us and tell us we are liars. This is where we get this independent power, not to be dependent anymore on the herd. So we come from this tribal past, when we were completely depending on our tribe for survival. And we had to make a lot of compromises, and to compromise our inner truth or our inner belief for the sake of the herd, just to be accepted and belong to some structure that can keep us safe. For many people, it's still unfortunately the condition. For many women in the world, it's still the condition. But for those of us who are lucky enough to have the circumstance in life that we can actually develop this center without real danger to our life, it's really, really important to work on this chakra and to realize that we have the capacity to stand alone, even if everybody else don't agree with us. Even if we are completely deserted. And it's one of the most common fears I have encountered in my work. It's a very impersonal, collective fear that we all carry within our systems, to be exiled, to be socially shamed, to be the freak, to be the outsider. So we will do many things not to feel that way, but when we do that, we are in the state of this dysfunctionality. It's where we completely depend on other people. We give our power away instead of keeping it inside of us. Or we just play power games. We all know about them. Another aspect of it would be to become too ambitious, too violent. This is also the center of potential violence. So when we access our power or play with it in ways which are not balanced, we can harm other people. That's why we have the third weekend, the not popular weekend of the aggressor. Because we all are aggressors. We will talk about it a lot in the third weekend. So when we manage to balance the third chakra, and even in the more advanced state, when we awaken it, we get to feel ourselves as truly independent. In the sense that even if tomorrow the entire world will stop to exist and we will remain alone, it will be okay. Not from the survival point of view, in the material level, but from the psychological point of view. We will be enough for ourselves. And in the state of balance in the third chakra, we also feel a great sense of freedom. And that's why my teacher always used to say that without a solid third chakra, we cannot talk about love. There is no possibility to talk about love. Because unless we have this very strong individuality, which is authentic, it will be very hard for us to really love other people. Because otherwise, love and power will always get mixed up with it, one with the other. So we transcend fear in the third chakra. And only when we transcend fear, so you can see we transcended fear in all three chakras, right? The fear, the very basic survival fear, and the fear of being shamed, and the fear of being exiled. And only then we can really have the possibility to enjoy a more balanced heart chakra, which we are going to look at now. The heart chakra is, everybody can feel that, right? The center of our chest, the upper chest. So this is really the center of the potential of unconditional love and connection with the divine. And it's a lot about our ability to see other people. And this is one thing that really shocked me in my process. I remember when I heard for the first time that as long as my heart chakra is not balanced enough, I can't really see other people. And that really confused me, because of course I can see other people, but so what do they mean with that saying? But it took me some time to realize that what I was seeing was my projections on people. That it was very hard for me to really fully grasp the full existence of the other, like a full autonomous creature that has his own mind, his own perception, his own way of living. I really couldn't see that. People were just the extension of myself and how I wanted them to be like. And that's why we judge all the time, and we try to fix things in our inner reality and try to make people fit. That has nothing to do with unconditional love, of course. So when we start working on our heart chakra, in the dysfunctional state, we will probably meet some very heavy emotions of hurt. There's like the center of pain. I had so much pain. I never thought there's ever going to be an end to that pain. Because every time I used to tap that pain, it felt like an endless ocean. Like I couldn't see a limit to that. And I think that's not personal. I think we all have this feeling of pain somewhere stored in us. It's the feeling of being misunderstood, of being not accepted, of being not really seen. And a lot of traumas that of course happen within relationships get also stored in the heart chakra, not just in the first chakra. So all the times we were abandoned, betrayed, lied to, all these disappointments, they are all stored in the fourth chakra. And unless we work on that and strive to balance that, it will always be there somewhere to condition our relationship with reality. And it will not allow us to trust. And trust is a very important thing in this life. So the more we balance the fourth chakra, the more we start to feel ourselves as a whole. And this, to start realizing the wholeness from within. You remember I told you before about this white light layer the white light layer helps a lot the fourth chakra to heal. Because the more we spend time in that vibration that we are absolutely perfect, don't need to do anything for it, that we are absolutely loved, even if our parents didn't love us, even if my husband loves me sometimes, and my children, well, let's not even talk about them. Everything is so conditional that there is a space within me that is completely unconditional. And the more I feel it, the more I am convinced in the existence of that state, the more I can start give it to other people. And of course, that's when our relationships stop being a battlefield, a war zone, a game of throne, right? This who's got the power, and it can really become a friendly zone, a respecting zone, where the other has his space and he has his right to be himself with everything he feels and thinks, even if it doesn't fit my agenda. So it teaches us a lot about respect. And we don't feel threatened because we have our own individual level. So that's the real ground for friendship, for real communal feeling. And of course, in the more expanded state of the heart, when it really starts to awaken, we actually have the access to this unconditional love, which is the nature of the universe. The heart really expands physically. It's a wonderful feeling. Like the heart can contain everything. It's like a universal mother that holds the entire existence in its hands and naturally cares for it. We don't need to practice compassion. We will be compassionate. And not that I'm against compassion, like I'm not against these kind of practices, of course. I think it's better to practice compassion than not. But practicing compassion without really balancing the heart chakra will not be enough. It will only be a technique rather than our state. So I urge you to do that. And the throat chakra, fifth chakra area. I'm sure we all know that because everybody feels, every time I ask people to put their attention on the throat, the first thing we all feel is suffocation. This is why it's also physically, right? The narrowest area in our body. It's where everything gets condensed. So the fifth chakra is connected to self-expression, expression in general. Our ability to manifest, to get things from the inner world and put them out there, give them shape and form, make them visible. It's the layer of visions and dreams. And many times when it's dysfunctional, we have this feeling that we cannot really show ourselves. The real me is hiding in the cave, and then we have this social mask we put on. We get out from the house, we walk. This is what we believe will fit other people, and it will not endanger our lower chakras. But that comes with a price tag, because we don't get to feel ourselves as we really are. And it makes us suffocate. Now you can understand better the logic of the chakras, that one builds on top of the other, right? Unless I have strong third chakra, how can I have a developed fifth chakra? It will be impossible. If I don't have the sense of individuality, of some power, it will be impossible for me to summon the courage to bring myself out there, to show myself. Because that's where we are vulnerable, we are exposed. And of course it influences our communication. So people with imbalanced fifth chakra could either be very gossipy. They will talk about all this nonsense stuff. They will use their voice for really immaterial things and maybe sometimes even harmful things. So the more we develop our fifth chakra, the more we learn about right communication. I remember when I was working on my fifth chakra very diligently, I had very awkward moments when I used to talk to people and I wanted to say something, but then I couldn't. Because from the practice I realized, well, if I say that, I will pollute the air. It will be polluting. Do I really need to say that? Would that give anything good to anyone, or it will just make me feel great? And I realized then I couldn't say that. So I would speak to people and in the middle of conversation I would stop. And then they will ask me what happened. I'm like, I was about to say something, but I don't want to say it. And then I had to rephrase myself. And that's when we learned that this self-expression center was meant to express beauty, was meant to express the positive part of life. Not because the negative is, we already heard, there is no darkness. But because through our voice we give rise to reality. It's not by accident that in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, God created the world with His words. He said that let there be light. So the power of the word is very strong. We can destroy people with words. And we can rebuild things with words. So part of our work on the fifth chakra is becoming more aware of what we communicate. And in the more expanded state, in the more developed states of the fifth chakra, there will be no more the division between inner world and outer world. We will not have to hide anymore. The inner and the outer merge, and we are what we are. For good or worse, because we know some will like us as we are, some will not. Doesn't matter. We are what we are, and we walk proudly, naked, exposed. I remember when I first heard the teachings of the different functions of the chakras, and of course, we always internalize it, like where am I in this mapping? And I was really happy to learn that we can develop so much. So it's not about making you feel, oh, I'm stuck in between the dysfunctional to the functional level and there's so much work to do. It's like, wow, there's so much expansion we can gain, right? This is our potential. We can become fully awakened. It's real. We can do it. Okay, sixth chakra. Here. In the forehead, between the eyebrows, just above the eyebrows. The center of our sixth chakra. This is the center of our clarity, of our wisdom, of our ability to discriminate right from wrong, true from false. And without a functional sixth chakra, it's very hard to achieve anything in life. It's even hard to understand what's going on in the other chakras. That's why it's really important to develop the sixth chakra. So people who are not very balanced in the sixth chakra will always be very conceptual. They will quote. Their knowledge will be an external level of knowledge. Some things that we heard, some things that strike us as real, but we don't really experience them, but we use them as slogans. And in the dysfunctional state, we also meet people who have a lot of mental access. They live in the brain. They think a lot. They try to understand the world through their thinking. And they get many times confused and obscured. It can also manifest as arrogance, people who think they know everything, while they don't really know so much. Or their knowledge is more theoretical rather than full body knowledge. And they also get neurotic. People who are dysfunctional in the sixth chakra, they get a lot, this level of neurotic feeling because they can't find the truth. They don't know what is real. So everything you tell them could be right. They have no opinion. So they're either too opinionated and arrogant, or they just don't know. They need somebody else to tell them what is true. And that's why the more we balance the sixth chakra, the more quiet it gets. All this inner noise, all this mental noise starts to subside. And we start to experience our wisdom from a completely different point of view. It's when we understand the impersonality of things. When we are dysfunctional, everything is so personal. It's all about me all the time, and it's only happening to me. But the more developed we are in the sixth chakra, the more we realize that nothing is personal. And when nothing is personal, everything can be transformed. It's not so unique. And of course, in the more developed state of the sixth chakra, we have this access to those subtle fields. You will see that when you expand, the more deep we go into these fields, the more the sixth chakra is awakened. Because it's the center of our vision into the universe. So remember I told you about the cosmic soul field. We can't access that field without the sixth chakra opening. But for the sixth chakra to open in a stable way, we need to first balance it. Expansion does that a lot. It just balances the sixth chakra. And the last chakra that most of us would normally not even feel is the seventh chakra, on top of our head. It's the center of our connection to the greater reality. It's like a doorway, it's like a gate. And for most of us who don't have it open, we would just feel ourselves as a pattern, a very closed pattern, with borders and outlines. And that gives us a separation feeling that here I am and there you are. But in the imbalanced state, we might find this separation more acute. When people have imbalances in the seventh chakra, and many times it would just be because of some wrong kind of exercise or practice in meditation, or taking psychoactive drugs and not having a very wonderful journey then, it can cause imbalances, and that's when we start to feel distortions in reality. We can start to feel very separated, and that causes pain. We feel like isolated. While the truth of the seventh chakra, of course, is unity. It's the other way around. It's not separation. It's oneness. So the more we balance the seventh chakra, the more we have access to that sense of oneness with the universe, a oneness with other people, the less we need to keep these borders so intact. We will always feel them on a functional level, but on a deeper level, they will not exist. And then we cannot judge others anymore because we see them as part of us. Before it was more emotional in the heart, but in the seventh chakra it's really our perception. It's how we see things. Because the more our chakras develop, the more they influence our physical senses, they refine them. So that was a very brief journey through the chakras. We will take a break now. If you have any questions about the chakras, skip them for a little later. Yes. We will have a break of 15 minutes, drink some water, and we will come back for our next step, which will be a short demonstration.